Right, welcome back to the last session before lunch. If you're coming in, if you can grab your seats as soon as possible, please, that would be really appreciated, and we'll start the next session. Before we do remember to visit the exhibition. Great exhibition this year, which Rosie put together, and that amazing view of the city of Prague as you stand there. Thank you also to our sponsors, to Radio Intelligence for the badge and the program, to Triton for the lanyards, and to Top Format for the staff t-shirts. They're the black ones as opposed to the red ones, which you can buy. They are selling quite fast apparently. If you want your red t-shirt, they're available at the registration desk downstairs where you came in. Right, this is always a very popular session, being part of Radio Days for many, many years, the Radio Summit. And to compare this year, as always, Matt Deegan. Matt.
Thanks, Paul. Lovely to be here this afternoon. So, as Paul said, this is the Audio Summit, where we're talking to some of the best leaders from across Europe. Loads of topics are going to come up: hybrid radio, the future, discovering content, community building, and talking about Gen Z as well. If you've got questions that you think as you're listening to any of the speakers, if you go into Swap Card and click the Summit button, so this session, there's like a live discussion button, and you can ask a question there, and I'm going to try and do my best to keep an eye on that as we chat to the speakers. I'm really fortunate in my job. I'm the creative director at Folder Media in the UK, in that we do lots of things. We work with lots of people across the world on content and platforms. And everyone has a mixture of challenges, a mixture of opportunities, and it's always great to hear about them. So I'm really excited to hear from our guests today. And speaking guests, this is our brilliant panel. We've got Martina, the CEO of Active, Charles-Emmanuel Bon, Secretary General of Radio France, Cathinka Rondan, Head of Radio NRK, and Guy Fränkel, MD at Rock Antenna. Our first speaker, we'll start with the local speaker first. Got a really interesting background, a lot of ad agency background, Leo Burnett, Starcom MediaVest, and now the CEO of Active Radio Group, operators of stations here like Europe 2 and Frequency 1. Martina. Can we have the lector mics on would be great.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
There we go.
Thank you very much. I got a question about the challenges of the market. Obviously, we are all working in a people business. So the first challenge, and my biggest challenge, would be people that are in the center of the radio. Now, grooming a moderator, grooming a talent, at the moment, for us means a year work, and usually it's 1/10 of the people that we can actually think about putting on air, and it's usually something we are starting to do during the weekends, during the night days. So this is where we start to work with the hosts, see how they do, and then maybe move them to the weekdays. But this is something that we all know, we've been living through. But I recently acquired a job in a publishing house, and what I realized that we often start to forget about the content that we're creating, and we are more thinking or focusing on the technical part. So we are all talking about the apps, we are talking about the webs, and we say, okay, I can't have my content better than I have because I need a new web page, or I need to have a new app that's able to have great push-ups. Now, this is where I think we are creating most of the mistakes. And this is where I was quite surprised in the publishing house, and it's often also on the radio side, that we forget, because we have the technology, we have the great technology, we forget about the content that should be there first. Now, with the AI coming in, I still don't have the answer what will happen after the AI. What I know, actually, for the time being, that we can leverage the AI at least on the trending part. So at the moment, where, for example, we are creating podcasts, what we can easily do, we can create much more podcasts, much more different podcasts at the same time and kill them after 5 series, because we know they are not good enough, because we have the AI behind it and we have the trending. So we know whether the podcast is good or not, and we don't have to wait for another 2 months to see the ratings, because we already can see it quite often, quite fast. So this is where we are. So we are still back at the creating the content, the real one, the relevant, the one that the listeners want to buy, or at least they will not switch off your radio and all move onto a platform like Spotify or YouTube, where Europe 2, for example, is competing the most because it's a young radio. So I would say that my biggest challenge for this year and for next year will be content and appealing content.
Martina, everyone, come and grab a seat. A round of applause, please. So we're just going to have a quick look through some of the things that you said. If we have the presentation on the screen. So you talked about new talent there, talked about content being key, talk about some of the benefits of AI. I think there's a kind of interesting discussion at the moment, isn't there, about AI, is it a threat, is it digital presenters, or actually is it a tool for radio stations? What's your take on that?
I think for the time being it's a tool, but of course people would understand it, some of them would also understand the threat. I think we need to do, the biggest challenge at the moment is fact-checking, because you can't really get the facts there. And since you're operating in a Czech market, while the learning procedure is based on the Czech language, you have quite limited learning, library behind it. So that the fact-checking and how to teach editors to ask the right questions to get the answers is key at the moment. I don't know what will happen in future. For the time being, it's trending and modeling.
There's definitely a new job that's going to be created around like prompt writing, isn't there?
Definitely.
Services.
Definitely. Yeah.
Thanks for that. Right, our second speaker has spent time at RTL, at Group M6, at Lagardère. He joined Radio France as Director of Distribution and Strategic Projects. He's now the Secretary General, Charles-Emmanuel Bon. Charles.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Just basically wanted to touch down on 3 points and leave more time for the discussion. But the first one is that when we are thinking about radio, we're now thinking about audio. Actually, our tagline for the greeting season was "Audio is the new cool," and we are very much still viewed as a radio station and as a radio leader, and we need to become the audio leader. And so that means that when we think about what we do every day, we need to move our focus from linear to non-linear and actually think our shows, our content in a non-linear way in order to become a more audio company and become the leader of audio. And I think that's very important in the way our producers make their radio shows. The second point I wanted to touch down upon is about the audiences. Traditionally, we think about audience in terms of demographics, whether they're young, they are older, whether they're rich or not. Actually, we think that we need now to segment the audience more in the way they use digital media and especially social media. And I think that's very important. We see that radio audience as a whole is declining a little bit, but some of the people, some of the audience is actually not tuning into radio anymore, and that we need to really address those segments and those audiences. And in order to do that, we need really to understand how they use digital media and how they use social media. That means for us that probably we have to produce less, but distribute more. So it means that having less shows probably, but more different ways of presenting our content to the audience so that we can really reach people that are not anymore onto the radio. And the third point I wanted to touch base on was disinformation. I think as a public service, we have a real duty to be the vanguard of fighting disinformation. But what we see is that with all this technology coming in, especially artificial intelligence, it's like a tsunami this information. And I think one of the key points for us, and as a media as a whole, is to understand how we can use technology and we can use innovation, especially artificial intelligence, to fight back for this disinformation wave and actually help our journalists to spot different trends, to spot how disinformation is made in order to be able to respond and to be able to be present in every single platform where this disinformation happens. And since it's a lot of data, we need to have the help of artificial intelligence to help our journalists to do that.
Round of applause for Charles. Come and take a seat. So interesting there, talking about kind of profiling audiences. And you sort of touched on one of the challenges that I think lots of radio stations across Europe face, which is engaging with young audiences who maybe haven't got the radio habit. What sort of profiling are you doing that's sort of identifying issues for them or what you need to do to reach those younger audiences?
What you see is that actually it's not really thinking about young versus old, but you have some people in the society that are really interested by news. I think that science is interesting, that vaccination is good, for example. And you have some people that are absolutely not in this mindset. And actually reaching the first audience, whether they're young or not young, is not that difficult for us because basically they are interested in the forum of society. What is more difficult is to think about those audiences, not really in terms of what demographic they are, but what usage they have, and especially what usage they have of social media. And so in order to reach them is to go onto those platforms and to be able to build content that will interest them and make them think that maybe there is another way. So it's not really about younger versus older, it's more like usage and actually view of the public space.
And is it a challenge to get your program teams to think about your audiences in those ways?
Well, actually, it's really a marketing way of seeing things, and what is really interesting is to have an interaction between the marketing team who is bringing these new insights, especially in segmenting the audience, and to feed that to the program people and the programming teams so that they understand that they cannot keep talking to the same kind of overall target in terms of usage, but they need to find new ways and test new formats, new incarnations. And I think what's really important is not only the content that you produce, but also the incarnation that you use on social media, and so that they need to test and to address those. And I think it's really the link between the marketing team and the program team.
Okay, thanks, Charles. Our third speaker spent the early part of her career at NRK, working on P2, P3 and culture. After being head of podcasts and radio at Rubicon, she's now head of radio at NRK. Cathinka.
Thank you. NRK is a Norwegian public service broadcasting, and we have 13 radio channels and 60 on DAB and 60-ish podcasts. And when you have that amount of content, and there are several different possible distribution possibilities, it's easy to lose energy running everywhere, being everywhere. So we decided to focus a bit further in the future and what is the most important distribution for us there, and decided that that was NRK Radio and strengthening our own platform. And that gave us the possibility to have one focus together as an organization. In the app, we have 50% radio listening and 50% on-demand listening. So if we focus together on our mutual home, which is the NRK Radio app, it doesn't really matter if you're a radio or if you are a podcast. We think it makes more sense to talk about the need for sound, live sound, right here, right now, or the need for sound when you want. And it became kind of a us versus them with the radio and podcast people in NRK. And when we did this, we brought the organization together and in one common goal, and you have the product developers working together with the people making the content on how to be interactive with the audience in the app. And with the listeners, and it does, like Charles was talking about, it doesn't really matter. You have several different windows, so you have one core content. And then we can focus on building daily habits in the home that we have together. And all sound, both radio and podcast, has to be easy to choose and easy to discover, to be tempting. And to do that, we are developing better presentation, better texts, better titles, better pictures, because sound is much more than sound these days. But as Martina was talking about, it isn't enough with the presentation. The content really has to be good. And we know that most of the audience chooses contents because their friends or family told them that it was good, that they recommended it. And for that to happen, it has to be engaging. So we also focus on how long a listener listens to an episode or a show, more than how many. Because as our radio analyzer, Tor Eide, also says, before you see increase in a number of listeners, you will see increase in how long they listen. And that's something the content people that are making the shows can do themselves, is focus on how to be even more engaging. And all of this helps everybody in NRK to know their part in building the common home we have together, NRK Radio, and that brings us all together towards the future.
Thank you. A round of applause. So you talked a lot there about trying to kind of bring your teams together and I guess center around the app. Do you think, what were the challenges that you had to kind of overcome to roll out that strategy?
Well, for one thing, we had to take a bold decision to start pulling our podcast back only to the app, and to dare to say that we are good enough, that we don't have to be dependent of other third-party platforms. And then it started working, so then we grew more confidence, which was really good. But it was, in a way, it was very... once we looked at the future, and radio and podcast had that future together and weren't like against each other on different distributions or one, we were talking so much more about the one because that's where we needed to be better. Radio was going well. It was kind of a lot of energy. It was bad energy went away and good energy took its place in having a common goal. So I think it's not so interesting if it's radio or podcast. It's just different needs at different times.
Great. Well, I think that's probably a topic we'll come on to talk about more. Our final speaker spent time as the music director of Radio Fantasy before joining Rock Antenna in 2000, doing a variety of roles across Austria and Germany, and now he's the managing director. Guy Fränkel. Guy.
Thanks for having me. When you asked me to give you a little insight about the main topics for the upcoming year and the future, of course they're very similar to these of my colleagues. Number one is, of course, a technology issue, combining digital and analog distribution and developing them. Rock Antenna is we have an all-channel strategy, meaning you can, of course, find us online and on the satellite, but also on digital radio in Germany and Austria, and also on FM in certain locations. So we're trying to optimize the channels and combining them. Give you some examples. We're going to launch a new website and app where we will have an extension of the analog program and more features in the future, with extra features for the users. And we recently opened an affiliate office in Vienna, and for example there's still an analog technology with FM frequency, and we built a new studio technology which gives us the possibility of handling the studio in Vienna from Munich, where our home base is. Second topic, also similar, of course, is community and brand building for Rock Antenne. Of course, as a special interest radio, we have learned early that at the beginning we wanted to be the voice of the rock community and of our fans. But we learned very quickly that in the changing markets, it's a better position for us to be the voice of the community. So we basically put our brand not on top of the rock movement, but just a part of the crowd, and we're combining and we're very close with our audience. We have a very strict brand management to stay in the rock universe and music universe, and building up the community, which has worked great in the past years. Yeah, and last but not least, of course, keeping up with the generation Z and Alpha, which is a challenge for all of us, but especially Rock Antenne, we have a rather older program with a lot of classic rock, so also our audience is a little older, but we have seen that young music fans, although they have the big digital variety, they're looking for anchor points. So we have accepted that they're not with us 24/7, but we want to be an anchor, and we teach our anchors that are sometimes already over 50 to open their social media channels for the audience. Also here we took the brand Rock Antenne and made it even. Nothing has to come always from our website and our social media contents, but we give our announcers and crew members the space to be part of the community and to extend the brand on their own channels.
Round of applause for Guy. And interesting, you sort of talking there about sort of brand supremacy, which kind of in 90s and noughties was important. You know, get the brand out, the brand's the mothership, and to sort of take that down a level. What's that been like in how you rethink how the radio station works?
It works fine. Yeah, it works fine. No, look, we just need to look at the market, and we see that there are so many brands. Basically, everybody who wants to sell a roll of toilet paper will create content today on a social media challenge and make a roll of toilet paper live. So we need to rethink our brands, and in the brand variety, just be, from our point of view, a part of the community. That's why I said we want to be the voice. You will hear, for example, at Rock Antenne, almost in every hour you will have listeners on the air, but not necessarily for a competition. But we just recently had in Hamburg the case that somebody called. He wanted to give like a traffic notice, and he told the announcer, "Hey, you weren't here for a week. You were on vacation. How was your vacation?" We give the announcers the space to tell them, "Okay, tell him how your vacation was. Not a problem for us. Be part of the community."
Well, lots of topics kind of came up in all of your sessions. I think one of the things that sort of strikes me is kind of digital and analog, and that transition obviously from being traditional analog broadcasters, FM broadcasters, obviously entirely digital broadcast country, and different people on that journey. Thinking about just the digital broadcasting side, and I'm very kind of conscious that France is kind of really invested in DAB over the last kind of 12 to 18 months. What is that kind of change of distribution, how has that changed your kind of group strategy?
Well, for us, DAB is still broadcast, so I think it's important, and we see it as a kind of a bet on the future. It's cheaper than FM, so it's a way for us as a public broadcaster, but also for our private competitors, to spend less on transmitters and spend more on content. But I think it's only one part of the equation, and we need to be very active onto what I said, hybrid radio. You can understand hybrid in many ways, and I think we also need to be hybrid between broadcast, and DAB is part of that, and IP distribution. And I think it's really important that we think about there is the linear world, there's the non-linear world, and those two must at one point meet. And if they can meet with DAB, that's great, but we cannot wait that everybody is equipped with DAB, because the users are moving much faster than they are buying DAB cars, for example.
I mean, Cathinka, you're sort of at the other end of that. You sort of doubled the number of your channels. Obviously, you sort of built that portfolio up over the years, and then switchover happened. You've now got quite a large portfolio of radio stations. Have you had to think differently about how you manage all of them, rather than maybe what was the smaller number on analog before?
Yes, we had this, we've talked a lot about the radio group in NRK, about the wholeness of the channel, so that it demands that each channel is much more clear and specific. You have to know exactly what the channel is, and together they have to make like a good package. So, after Norway went over to DAB, the listeners went from listening to 1.5 channels each to between 3 and 4. So it's much more like, okay, now I'm in the mood for talk radio and news, now I want to relax with jazz. So they choose radio channels after a mood, in a way. And that's also easy to serve in an app where we kind of present it in a different, we know that more people listen to jazz Friday night. So then we can present that Friday night and give them news Monday morning. So it's about creating habits every day through the day, and then presenting that to the listener in a good, so they make like a total day that's good for them in a way.
So sort of a bit more portfolio management than it is kind of channel management.
Yes.
I mean, one of the challenges that a few of us picked up on was obviously younger audiences, and it's perennial Radio Days content worrying about younger audiences. I mean, Martina, your radio stations are very obviously targeted, a number of them at that group. How do you tackle this challenge of a younger group of people that obviously have a lot more media choices than consumers did 20 years ago?
Yeah, I think first of all, it's not about creating radio. We are creating audio, that's first. Secondly, we are creating whatever we do, we create in different formats. So, for example, the morning show, we also cut into podcasts that you can have on Spotify. You also have shorts. If you have calls or if you have different musicians in the studio, you'd have them on TikTok. So basically, as the youngsters, they do not really differentiate different media channels. What they care is about the content. This is what I said at the beginning. It's about the channel that's fastest at the moment we need for conveying the message. And it doesn't matter what the channel is. So it might be audio. We at the moment are testing the player that's capable of going from linear to on demand and vice versa. I think I saw it like 2 years back in Radiodays. I found it really charming, so we tried to do it as well. As the AB here is not really existing much, it's really small. So we already have half of our listeners in some kind of a player, either an app or player. So this is how we do it. So we create the content, and then you think about how to cut the content or how to change not really change, but how to adjust the content to the media vehicle using to convey the message to the listener. That's it. Easy.
You sort of talked there, and you talked earlier, sort of almost about the unit of content and where that needs to go, rather than let's fill up a radio channel with content. It's like,
this is how we do it.
Content come first.
Yeah. And I was surprised because I think some of you said that you're creating less content than before, and you're thinking about cutting the content into the media vehicles. Now with the learning process, it's faster now. We're creating more content than before, but we cut the content faster. So yes, so we create the content, we see where it goes, we adjust it to the media vehicle, and at the end of the day, some of them will not survive tomorrow.
I mean, Guy, for Rock Antenna, trying to think about units of content or multi-platform distribution, be that social or audio content, how do you? Has there been a need to change how the station's structured to better meet these needs?
For for sure, because it used to be, for example, let's do an interview and how can I use it on air? And of course we started thinking, how can we fill up all the channels? What can we do with the extra content? How can we make an extension from the program in the digital world? Does it always have to be on demand? Can we maybe combine it and find some crossroads? And this is there's been a 360-degree thinking process to widen the horizon, and basically what we just established now a few months ago is that we said, okay, there is no digital and analog anymore. We stopped that so that the units would just think together, that it becomes more natural for them, for the team, not for the teams, for the team, analog and digital and online, to combine the process. There has to be one process for all the channels in the team.
And is there a commercial challenge having, I think it's a sensible model. Obviously, commercial radio, we're used to selling spots, used to selling sponsorship, and now we're creating multi-platform content. Has it been difficult for the sales team to work out how to monetize all of this?
Same. It was just a change of the thinking process, because basically, of course, as a general manager, I want to pick up every euro that there is. But with a strict brand management, we need to combine it. So we have also made a change in the sales unit. They're working way closer together with marketing to give the product the feel that we want in the program, and after a few changes also and talks with our partners and clients, they're very happy, and they want to book, let's say, the same promotions over and over again, because they worked out with the straight brand management. They stayed with our community, and we have created also new fields for partners that have not been invested in radio at all. For example, the motorcycle scene.
So is that people who've advertised in digital before, and now they actually just see you as a digital operator rather than, we don't advertise on the radio?
It's both. They're used to the classic radio, but it's not only for radio, it's for every industry. It's a change process. So if we can help our customers go on a journey with them and also consult them with the digital programs. For example, I just said the motorcycle scene. They're used to selling motorcycles from their shops. So they also have the wish to become more digital, and we're trying to combine it and also consult them and just be long-term partners.
Charles, you talked a bit about disinformation in your session. The world is more split. People can happily live in their own filter bubbles. There's a declining lack of trust in traditional media because it doesn't reflect what they see in their filter bubbles. You're obviously a public broadcaster. Does that make the job of doing the news much harder when audiences are perhaps a little more split than they used to be?
It's indeed very, very much harder. Type of eat your greens type of news where you have a kind of a top-down saying that's the news and everybody's in front of the radio in the morning or in front of the TV in the evening. Is not anymore the case, and that's why when I was saying produce less and distribute more, it means not less content. Is that, for example, you need to spend more time. Maybe you have one larger news show, but then you have to edit it and to find new incarnations so that you can reach audiences that will never tune into your radio or will not trust you. And so that's a very big challenge for public broadcasters, because that's our role is, to maintain the fabric of democracy. And for us, that's a very strong meaning. And that we need to reach those audiences, and we need to reach them where they are, and not think that they will come back just magically to the radio.
Cathinka.
We have had very interesting experience now when we've been pulling our podcasts back from third-party platforms, because then we've taken those very popular entertainment podcasts, and when we send those listeners to our app, we see that they start choosing a news show because we show them the news show, because we can do that there. We can't do that in Spotify, for example. The control of the presentation and the control of the home also gives you an easier possibility to say, I know you came for comedy, but what about this? And they go, oh yeah, maybe, and they give it a try. So that's also a way to kind of
Do you think
make less filter bubbles.
So in kind of public radio 30 years ago, I think probably most European broadcasters had like one or two sort of central broadcast channels where they could do that. They could basically point to different types of content. Does that become more essential in the digital world for a public broadcaster to own more of their audience's time?
That's part of our job, is to show like the whole range of culture and news and documentaries and entertainment and comedy. And to be able to do that, we had another example where we launched a poetry podcast at the same time we were pulling listeners with a very popular entertainment podcast back to our app. And then when we could we showed all the time that poetry podcast for the listeners coming to the app, and increased the listening of the poetry. And you know, that kind of giving the audience the whole range is a very important part of the public service, and we can only do that in our own home.
Do you think there's a challenge when there's a lot of kind of news comment in the podcast world? Some more centrist, some very left, some very right. Traditionally, public broadcasting hasn't had a strong opinion. Does that opinion programming need to come into public radio more because listeners are getting it from other locations? Or is your job to try and balance all of that?
No, I think we need both. We just launched a commentary news podcast for a couple of weeks ago. So I think you need both, the whole range, but it has to also be clear, the contract, what you're getting when. Yeah.
Is opinion difficult for Radio France?
Opinion is not difficult in the sense that radio is a place for debate. But of course, there is a view, and especially in part of the segment of the population I was talking before, that we are biased, and of course is in a more liberal type of bias than conservative. But still, I think it's important that radio is a place you talk. So it's important that there is a debate on the radio, and we have to present the facts and maybe put more emphasis in separating the facts from the commentary. But I think commentary is still part of the conversation, and it's what's important is, especially as a public broadcaster, is to be able to show all the sides of the commentary. But it's really important that we keep the conversation going.
Martina, as a kind of commercial broadcaster, and there's obviously lots of different news outlets, lots of different places to get that information. How important is news to what you do for your audiences?
I think this has changed quite a lot after the COVID situation, because during the COVID time, people here in Czech, but I guess it was pretty much everywhere else, they switched into the public stations. And what I see nowadays is, I'm sorry to say, but also with the Ukrainian situation, people tend to be tired of news. So what I see in our stations is that the focus is pretty much music, entertainment, but much less news than it was before. But we have quite high listenership of podcasts that are including news, but they are not on air in the linear stations. So from our side, it's more music and entertainment for the linear stations, but the heavy stuff is on the podcasts.
Getting a couple of questions through on Swapcard. If you want to go on Swapcard, select the session, hit live discussion, and you can drop a comment there. We've got about 3 or 4 minutes left. A question from Hannah Taylor. Charles mentioned that there needs to be fewer programs distributed more. Do you map out a sort of desired audience funnel between those platforms, or is it a little more random than that?
No, I think you need to. That's what about segmenting. That you need really to think through who you want to address, and you have to do that through what type of content, whether it's more entertainment, more news, and you have to cross that through the platform you're targeting. So whether is it Facebook or is it Twitter or whatever. So that's really important. Is really to look at the segment and what they are interested in. in order to produce. So when I'm saying less content is less shows, but that doesn't mean that you do not need to, when I say distribute more, is to actually produce a content that is really on the targeted audience. And you need really to understand both in a usage standpoint and in terms of the type of focus, what type of program you need to make.
Maybe a question for Guy. A question from the audience from Philip. Will the digital output dominate and influence the linear radio flow if there's more of a kind of on-demand strategy? Is on-demand wagging the linear dog's tail, if I mix my metaphors?
For sure, the on-demand variety will probably be bigger one day, but I strongly believe that we have a few assets left. One of them is the soul. I spoke about that last night also at an event, and the soul is something very human. So this is why we have this strong community building and brand building. Sorry if I always come to the same, but it's the core of our strategy, and this will last, hopefully, for a very, very long time. Nobody knows the future, but I hope for all of us it'll last for a long time. And the more soul you give, the more they will stay also in the linear program. But you need to also not be scared of the future and just see the on-demand content as an addition to keep them in your world.
Well, as we're just about running out of time, kind of one question for you all. If you look to the next 12 months, what's the one thing that you're really tackling or really thinking about in your organizations?
The key points that I mentioned at the beginning, basically, yeah, and building up the new station in Vienna.
Great. Cathinka?
Yes, it's the same. It's working more together towards the common goal, and learning by every step we take, and recalibrating and thinking again and going further.
Charles? There's one thing that you really motivating your team.
I think for the 12 next month, and it's going to be further than that, we need also to train our people to think differently and to produce differently. And for them, for some of them, it's a big change. I mean, moving from sound design to motion design is not an easy task. So I think training is something that we need really to focus on.
Martina?
Okay, I guess everything was already said, but okay, I will turn to my AI. I want to find AI as my friend, not fight it. This is the case at the moment, so I would like to learn more and the company to leverage more AI.
Excellent. If you could all thank our guests, Martina, Cathinka, Charles and Guy. I think you can hear more from Martina in a session at 12 o'clock tomorrow in track 4. Paul.
Fantastic, Matt. Bang on time to the absolute second. A total pro. Thank you very much indeed. Matt Deegan and his guest with the Audio Summit. We now have a break for lunch for 1 hour. Back in here at 2, and again, it's more on AI and ChatGPT technology. Is it a risk to your business or is it an enhancement for your radio station? See you at 2 o'clock. Enjoy your lunch. Right, okay, a little bit of a break now.